did you go to the police? Why didn't you come to me first?
What do you want of me? Tell me anything, but do what I beg you to do.
What is that?
The endocrine system. The system set up to maintain the body's homeostasis. With all the activities constantly going on in our body, we need a system that has effective communication. When something is not right and homeostasis has been disrupted, word needs to be passed along so that it can be fixed. We also need to know that someone or something is constantly monitoring the system and getting feedback. Someone needs to be in charge. Someone needs to plan everything out. The person listening to the body and planning this all out is the hypothalamus, the Don Corleone of the endocrine system. He's the one in charge of the family business and keeping homeostasis maintained. He's the head honcho, the big cheese. But as capable as he is in calling all the shots, he still needs someone to make sure the job is getting done.
That I cannot do.
Enter Tom Hagen, played by Robert Duvall, sitting on the left. He's playing the role of the pituitary gland, the consigliere of the endocrine system. He's the guy that listens to the hypothalamus and makes sure that all his bidding is getting taken care of. But what exactly is the consigliere? Michael Corleone will tell you all about it.
He's a good lawyer. Not a Sicilian. I think he's going to be consigliere.
What's that?
That's, like a counselor, an advisor. Very important to the family.
The pituitary gland has his hands in everything endocrine. But how can one little gland, the size of a pea, run the entire show? First, it listens to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus releases a slew of hormones directed at the pituitary gland, telling it what to do. The pituitary gland then makes sure that everybody knows what's going on. Here is an example of exactly what I'm talking about.
Good. Someday, and that day may never come, I'll call upon you to do a service. But until that day, accept this justice as a gift on my daughter's wedding day.
Grazie. Yes,
Great. Give this to Clemenza. I want reliable people, people that aren't going to be carried away. I mean, we're not murderers, in spite of what this undertaker said.
Clemenza is a soldier. He's a leg breaker. He's one of the many that actually does the dirty work for the family business. So Vito Corleone just told Tom Hagen to have Clemenza get the job done. Or another way to say this would be, the hypothalamus sends a hormone to the pituitary gland, which then sends another hormone to a secondary gland, such as the thyroid or adrenal gland, so that these secondary glands do their job. The pituitary gland listens to the directions, then makes sure the right things happen to maintain homeostasis. And as Vito points out, he wants reliable people, people who aren't going to get carried away. The pituitary gland is the most reliable of glands. The hypothalamus could not have chosen to surround itself with a better consigliere. So what is the anatomy of the pituitary gland? The pituitary gland is roughly 0.5 gram in weight, and it hangs at the base of the hypothalamus in the brain by the infundibulum. It's made up of two lobes, the posterior lobe and the anterior lobe. The posterior lobe contains primarily axons from the hypothalamus heading down to the body. It also stores two hormones processed by the hypothalamus. The anterior lobe is where the pituitary gland produces its own set of hormones and a variety of hormone-producing cells. So what are the soldiers or secondary glands that the pituitary gland targets? And how does it communicate to them? The pituitary gland releases 9 different hormones between its anterior and posterior lobes, each of which targets a gland or some other piece of anatomy around the body. First, we'll talk about the posterior lobe. There are 2 hormones secreted by the posterior lobe: antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, is released in response to high solute concentration in the blood. It targets the kidneys and ensures that more water is pumped back into the bloodstream from the kidney tubules when solute levels are too high. The higher the level of ADH, the more water is retained. This is important because when blood volumes drop as a result of dehydration, the concentration levels of salt rise. ADH in high levels can also cause vasoconstriction, which leads to an increase in blood pressure. If it wasn't for ADH, we would not be so effective at maintaining blood pressure, blood volume, and solute concentration homeostasis. The second hormone released by the posterior pituitary gland is oxytocin. This hormone stimulates smooth muscle contraction in the uterus, which then leads to labor and delivery of children. It also stimulates the production of milk in the mammary glands of mothers and sexual arousal in both men and women. And if there was no such thing as sexual arousal, there would be no family business. The posterior lobe of the pituitary gland secretes those previous 2 hormones, which are actually made by the hypothalamus. There's a little bit more going on in the anterior portion of the pituitary gland. 7 hormones are produced and secreted here, targeting a variety of secondary glands and structures. Shown on the PowerPoint is the hormone and the primary target of that hormone. There are other parts of the body that respond to these hormones as well. TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, targets the thyroid. This in turn causes a release of thyroid hormones. These thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, stimulate the body's metabolism. The thyroid is a soldier. It's doing the dirty work, but the pituitary gland is the one actually regulating the body's metabolism. ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone, targets the adrenal cortex, where it stimulates release of steroid hormones. It specifically targets cells that affect glucose metabolism. This increases rates of glucose and glycogen formation in the liver. It also stimulates amino acid release from skeletal muscles and lipids from adipose tissue. ACTH also stimulates the formation and release of cortisol from the liver, which acts as an anti-inflammatory. FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, are 2 gonadotropins. They regulate the ovaries in women and testes in men. FSH and LH regulate the release of these hormones and reproductive cells in the gonads, such as estrogens and androgens. These hormones regulate the sexual and reproductive development of men and women. Growth hormone is also secreted by the pituitary gland. This leads to more cell growth and reproduction by accelerating the rate of protein synthesis. This hormone primarily targets the liver, where it stimulates somatomedins. This in turn stimulates the uptake of amino acids into new proteins into the skeletal muscle. It also has a more direct effect on different tissues as well. In epithelial and connective tissue, it stimulates stem cell division. In adipose tissue, it stimulates the breakdown of triglycerides. And in the liver, it stimulates the breakdown of glycogen reserves, thus more glucose in the bloodstream. Prolactin, along with other hormones, works to stimulate mammary gland development. During the nursing period, it also stimulates milk production. And MSH, or melanocyte stimulating hormone, targets the melanocytes in the skin to produce more melanin. This in turn darkens the skin. It's also known to suppress appetites, and in adults, the MSN portion of the pituitary gland is often non-functional, and MSH is not detected in the blood. So those are the 9 different messages from the consigliere to the different soldiers. Lots of responsibility for one gland to have. In the family business, there's no room for error. Unfortunately, they can still happen. The vast majority of pituitary dysfunctions are caused by a tumor. The prevalence of pituitary tumors is actually quite high. It's 16.7% of the population, according to one study. Luckily, they are almost always benign. This condition can be broken down into 3 separate categories based on the effects. The tumor can cause hypersecretion, which means it stimulates too much of a hormone being released. It can also cause hyposecretion, meaning too little of a hormone is being released, or it can cause a physical side effect of the tumor, such as pushing on the pituitary gland or other parts of the brain. This can result in vision problems, headache, etc. Even if a tumor is not the cause of pituitary dysfunction, we are still able to break down the conditions based on these 3 categories. For this presentation, I won't be discussing the mechanical effects, just the first 2. We'll start with hypersecretion. Think what can arise from a hormone being too heavily secreted by the pituitary gland? Well, first, growth hormone. Too much growth hormone can lead to gigantism and acromegaly. Gigantism is exactly what it sounds like. It's a condition that causes abnormal growth in children, as seen as the tall fellow between the 2 ladies. Not just a bit of growth, but lots of growth. Acromegaly is when too much growth hormone is secreted during adulthood. Bone shapes change and increase in size, especially in the extremities. You can see it most often in the hands, feet, and face, like the fella on the right. Too much ADH secreted leads to a condition called SIAD, Syndrome of Inappropriate ADH Secretion. This will result in increased body weight and water content. This can cause hyponatremia because of the percentage of solutes will decrease. It can also result in edema. Those are the direct problems associated with hypersecretion of hormones from the pituitary gland, but as stated before, the pituitary is involved in just about everything endocrine, so do not forget all the indirect or secondary problems that can arise. If the 2 gonadotropins, FSH and luteinizing hormone, are hyposecreted, that will lead to an increase in estrogen and androgen. This could in turn lead to early puberty, enlarged breasts, more masculine features on women and more feminine features on men. If too many thyroid hormones are secreted as a result of too much TSH, a high metabolic rate and body temperature can result, leading to a severe fever. These are just a couple of the indirect consequences from hypersecretion of pituitary gland hormones. Now let's talk about the conditions that can result from hyposecretion. A lack of growth hormone can result in a variety of different conditions depending on when the lack of growth hormone started. As a child, this lack of hormone can result in dwarfism, a delayed puberty, or no puberty at all. I was actually looking for a picture of a mafia dwarf. Couldn't find anything appropriate. So here goes Tyrion Lannister for all you Game of Thrones fans. Dwarfism can be caused by many, many things, but in the case of Peter Dinklage, it was a congenital issue. A lack of ADH can result in too much excretion of water, a condition called diabetes insipidus. This would result in having to urinate really often, in some cases every hour, 24 hours a day, and have an uncontrollable thirst. This sounds absolutely awful to me. I hate being thirsty. The indirect or secondary issues that can arise are again plentiful. Several examples would be sterility or a lack of secondary sex traits in both men and women. This would arise from a lack of FSH or LH, in turn leading to another lack of estrogen and androgens. A lack of corticosteroids in the adrenal gland can result in Addison disease. This is a disease that is characterized by an inability to tolerate stress or mobilize energy reserves or maintain blood glucose levels. These sympathetic effects just are not able to be triggered. Cretinism will result from a lack of thyroid hormones. Individuals with cretinism have impaired physical and mental development and low metabolic rates and temperatures. These are just a few of the more common conditions that can result from pituitary gland dysfunction. When a consigliere pituitary gland is misfunctioning, you see the effects amongst all the soldiers, secondary glands and structures. Effects are systemic. It may not be It may not be down in the trenches like some of the other glands are, but the other glands need someone to regulate their behavior. That is why the pituitary gland is